Something exciting just arrived in the mail. Well, not just. This footage is actually from over a year ago, and I'm only now getting a chance to make a video about it. It's a Casio MT-70 from 1982. It was sent to me by a fellow composer and patron, Russ Palladino. Thanks, Russ. This keyboard is kind of special because it represents a very interesting moment in Casio history. But before we talk about that, let's do a quick tour. As you can see, it has 20 preset sounds. These range from mellow-sounding organs to mellow-sounding flutes. There's some nice chimey sounds. And then there's some mellow electric keyboard sounds. And then there's this cool thing. I really like that. In addition to the voices, it has an accompaniment section. You can use it in a few different ways. For example, here I'm just using it to play chords. As you can see, it shows you what chords it's playing on the little screen. In this mode, it does its best to figure out what chord you're trying to play and fix it for you. A collaborative process that often results in happy accidents. As with most other Casio keyboards, you can add in drums. There are 10 preset drum patterns, each labeled with a different musical genre. And then once you start playing chords, there are 2 different possible backings for each. There's the arpeggiated backing. And then there's what they call rhythmic, which is a genre-specific backing. The final stop on our tour is the sequencer. I'm going to switch to melody record mode, and now I'm going to play some kind of melody. Once I've got a melody I like, I press the end button, and then I switch back into play mode. Now watch what happens when I play it back. Yeah, it just plays the first note, like, super slowly. The reason that's happening is the keyboard has only learned what notes I want it to play, but not when it should play those notes. It's a pretty weird system. To actually have it play in rhythm, we need to switch back into record mode and teach it the rhythm. I'm turning on the drum track, and that's just going to serve as a metronome. So as I tap these one-key playback buttons, it's learning the rhythm of the notes. So then when I go to play it back, it'll play back in time. And yes, you can also change the tempo after the fact. As you've probably noticed, all of the presets on this thing are very mellow, and they're also pretty similar to one another. I was wondering why this was, so I decided to do some research. There's this wonderful page on the Casio website that shows many of the keyboards that Casio made up until 2020. I say many because the one we're talking about today actually isn't on this chart. Over the years, they released a huge number of different keyboards, each with subtly different features. But suffice it to say, when you hear the words Casio keyboard, you're probably picturing something like this. This is the Casio MT-110 from 1987. And the way it works is pretty simple. You press a key, and it plays back a very short sound recording of a real instrument. But anyway, before it became known for these sorts of keyboards, Casio explored many different kinds of synthesis. Their first big success was the VL1, which came out in 1981. I made a video about that last year. The VL1 produces its sound using combinations of pulse waves. But this keyboard, which was released in 1984, uses a completely different approach, one which is documented in this patent. Apparently, it generates its sound by adding together sine waves. Sine waves are, of course, pure tones that contain just one frequency. But here's the thing. This kind of additive synthesis is kind of an odd choice for recreating the sounds of real-world instruments. Take, for example, the sound of a single violin note being played. Each of these lines you see here is a frequency. In fact, if you were to isolate any one of these lines and just play it back, it would sound pretty close to a sine wave. By the way, when you see a graph like this, the lowest frequency in the sound is called the fundamental. That corresponds to the actual note being played. In this case, the frequency is 263 Hz, which, according to our handy chart here, means that the note is middle C. Coming back to the spectrogram, you see you have all these lines that are above the fundamental. These are called partials, and their presence is what makes a violin sound like a violin. I count about 40 lines here. According to this patent document, each voice on the MT-70 is only capable of mixing together 5 sine waves. In other words, it will never be able to produce a sound that is nearly as rich as a violin, which is how come violin is not one of the sound presets available on the MT-70. By the way, if you're wondering what a violin sounds like if you remove all but the first 5 frequencies, here it is. So yeah, it sounds a little bit like an oboe. Another thing that's worth mentioning about this instrument is it's one of a handful of Casio keyboards that has a plug for a barcode reader. The idea is you could teach the keyboard songs by scanning a barcode. I don't have the barcode reader pen myself, but Keen on Keys did a wonderful video about this keyboard a few years back that shows off the barcode functionality really well.
The lights show the melody and the display shows the played chords.
If you're curious about this functionality, I highly recommend watching that video. One of the side benefits of sine wave synthesis is it tends to sound really good with effects that do a lot of pitch bending. Here, I've plugged the MT-70 into my favorite pedal, the Microcosm by Hologram. As I play, the sound of each note disappears into the pedal, only to return in changed form a few seconds later. As I make my way through the presets, the character of the sound changes. The Microcosm has many different glitch modes. Each one mangles the sound in a different way. Over time, the notes accumulate, combining with those that came before, until all that remains is a wash of sound. Since I've got all my Casios out, and since they all have a rhythm preset called Rock 1, I thought it'd be fun to compare them. We'll start with today's guest of honor, the MT-70. It has a very thin, kind of classic analog drum machine sound, even though it's digital. Now let's bring in its younger brother from 1987. Okay, you can clearly hear that those are samples, i.e. recordings of drums. Although these two keyboards use completely different technologies, you can definitely tell that it's the same drum beat, with that distinctive open hi-hat at the end of the bar. Here's what they sound like together. And finally, let's add in the legendary VL1. And together with the other keyboards, I'm going to play that same chord progression from before. Just for fun, here's what that would sound like on the keyboard from 1987. So yeah, very different. I wonder how they would sound together. Oh, that's nice. Let's bring in the drums again. The early 1980s is sort of a fascinating time for Casio. They had just started making musical instruments. As we can see from these 3 keyboards, they explored several different ways of making sound before deciding that sampling would be their main focus. The MT-70, with its distinctive sine wave synthesis, was sort of the midway point on this journey, and I'm really glad I got to experience it. I want to again thank Russ Palladino for sending me this keyboard, which I have now recorded and turned into a sample library that is available to patrons. Speaking of which, the Patreon is just $5, and every month you'll get an exclusive sample library just for patrons. Oh yeah, and if you join, you'll also get access to the entire back catalog, which contains a ton of sample libraries. Quite a bargain. Okay, I think that's it. See you soon.